Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Surbhi Pokharna. I'll be talking about applying a security mindset on Azure Synapse Analytics. Quick introduction about me. I am a data professional with 20 plus years of experience. Currently, I'm involved with cloud data migration and also leading a global data platform services team. In addition to cloud data migration during last almost 2 years, so primarily we are on SQL Server, and also we are building a very large, serverless or PaaS data warehousing and data marts in Snowflake and Azure Synapse. And during this journey, learning a lot, making mistakes, learning from the experience. So a lot of moving parts in this journey going on. So in addition to my job, I'm also one of the board member or board of the directors for New England SQL Server User Group in Boston. NESQL, this user group is one of the world's largest SQL Server user group. Here is my contact information. And I would be, turning off my camera so you can get the full view of my screen. If you have any question, feel free to stop right in between or whenever you have question. When Justin is there as moderator, he'll let me know. If later on after this session you have still any question, here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me via Twitter or message or my email. So today we are here to talk about Azure Synapse Analytics security mindset. And end goal of this session is not only to give you a glimpse of what, how, and whys of Azure Synapse Analytics security, but also I want you to walk away with the data security mindset to do the, the right configuration in your environment. Let's use an analogy of car safety. Do you know that cars are designed to fail? Nobody can claim that a car would never have an accident. Oh my God, let's stop driving then. No, we don't stop driving, but we plan for the failure. We create multiple layers of defense mechanism from crumble zone to seatbelt to airbags. And with the latest technology, car safety has taken new highs with the 360-degree cameras, sensor, blind spot detection, and whatnot. So what we see here, we see an ever-evolving multi-layer defense system to minimize the impact. And exactly same story goes with the data security. There is nothing unique about the databases or analytic systems. With anything in security, we always think in layers, because if one layer fails, then also you're not left unprotected. Defense in depth is the key for every aspect of security, including Azure Synapse Analytics security. As you see in this picture, network is one of our security perimeter. We have all this stuff inside some big firewall, and we are confident that, hey, it's going to protect us. No, that's not really true. In the cloud, well, that service is not sitting on my own network in most of the instances. There are types of services that are dedicated and that can sit in my virtual network and might be different for analytics. Azure Synapse Analytics, we'll see. But still, all in all, it is in the cloud. So we have to think more than just the network. We have to think about other layers, and each layer contains its own multiple sub-layers. That is how we develop the mindset, which actually we start living our day-to-day. We start looking at every component from the lenses of security and start deploying those layers. But before we dive into this multi-layer security architecture, let's understand the core component of Azure Synapse ecosystem. Now, here, these are not Azure Synapse ecosystem. These are more like, what are the components in general, right? Okay, you have to do the data ingestion. There are various type of files, sources, structured data source, unstructured data source, JSON, CSV, Parquet, or various type of file formats. Then you use different tools, Azure Data Factory, mapping data flows to do the ingestion. Then underneath the storage, you use data lake. Then you use some other things from transform and enrich. And then you have to serve the data, and then finally consume the data and visualize the data. So all in all, what you see when you have to see this picture from the lenses of security, not from the lenses of workflow for ingestion or transformation. From the lenses of security, these are some independent pieces lying independently somewhere here and there. And there can be a data breach, there can be a SQL injection attack, there can be an unauthorized access. So there is everywhere you see one or the other way, these all components where they are sitting somewhere different on different pieces, they are not secured. So the good thing, at least from the overall model perspective, right, that Azure Synapse Workspace or Studio, it is a comprehensive or it is a unified analytics service that brings data integration, that brings data integration, enterprise data warehousing, and big data analytics, all these components together. There's a one-stop shop kind of environment where you get all these components together. So now that means it brings data ingestion, data enrichment, data serving in one single place. Okay. So now when you see, look at this thing, right? Okay, my storage is okay. Data lake Gen 2 I got. Compute, we have dedicated SQL pool, serverless SQL pool, Apache Spark pools. So when you say that, okay, we got everything together. So do I have like a one security mechanism and everything is going to be secured? So still there is a component isolation. Each individual component of Azure Synapse depicted in this diagram provides its own security features. And security features provide data protection, access control, authentication, network security, threat protection for securing the compute and the associated data that is being processed. Because we know, right, in Azure Synapse, so I'm not going into the concepts of these all individual items, right? This is something like not the agenda of this discussion. We are more, oh, okay, you have compute and storage, two different I am now areas. How do you secure them? And this level of component isolation, right, when we talk about that, and then on top of that, the different layer of security within the storage itself too. So this level of component isolation limits and minimizes the exposure if there were like a security vulnerability in any of one of these components. Okay. So now moving along, what are those layers, right? We are talking about what. So here this is the comprehensive and innovative security considerations, layers, master layer, and individual sub layers available in Azure Synapse Analytics. Now, all these security consideration, each layer contains its own sub layers. We should understand the in and out of each layer. That is what is Microsoft offering, right? But more than that, there is one more layer, which is called the shared responsibility. That is compliance and data privacy. Okay, it's great that you have there is something where you can prevent any unauthorized access, but who has to implement that? We, right? Who has to implement that? That is something Microsoft provided the feature. But now that means you have to understand your own ground zero about what do you have, your ground zero reality or your ground zero, you have to become the change agent who knows what are the groups, which group would need what kind of access, and then you start translating that into, oh, okay, this is stored procedure, or this is my actually Apache Spark pool. So what kind of security I can deploy there? So then you have to do the marry your knowledge and plus your own compliance and policies and accordingly configure. So as I said, this is the comprehensive and innovative security portfolio Azure Synapse Analytics has to offer to secure our application analytics workload. Isn't it looking super simple? Yeah, I know it looks a bit heavy. So we are here to build our successful security story using these defense in depth layers. And not only we need to understand all these options, as I said, we have to understand our own side of compliance and data privacy policies. Now, this slide or this picture, right? It also sets the agenda, what we will be talking about in our next, during the next 30, 40 minutes. At the same time, we cannot cover, this is a huge, vast topic. We cannot cover each layer, how to implement that. And everybody has their own different use case too. Somebody might be completely into the dedicated server pool, or somebody might be completely into Apache Spark pool. And fair enough, that's true. And somebody might be like, mix and match of everything. We would try our best to go around these things. And if you have more further deeper questions, which I won't be answer or something we won't have time, we'll discuss further. But this is the agenda which we will be going around. Okay, so moving along, let's start with the network. With the network security, there are 3 different sublayers. So we start with the managed VNet. What is a managed VNet? This is during when you are creating your Synapse workspace. It's a one-time configuration setting. You must enable this setting while creating the workspace. There is no option in Azure Synapse to create your own virtual network. And I like, when I understood this fact a couple of years ago, I was like, thank God, because this would have complicated this entire picture a lot. So since there is no option in Azure Synapse to create your own virtual network, we must enable this thing. The managed VNet does a lot for the particular Synapse workspace. It isolates Synapse workspace into its own sort of virtual network. And also it enables that managed private endpoints. We will understand what does this mean, and we'll check that in more detail. It allows you to enable data exfiltration protection, DEP, which prevents actually pool from hitting the public network. So as you can see that this configuration is, see, when we talk about the security considerations, if some configuration you must understand in and out while the configuring around, because later on there is no rollback. You cannot go back and change the configuration. It's a must to understand and also do it correctly. So you should enable your managed virtual network. Okay. Moving to the now, how there were 3 points, right? Like in the previous slide, managed virtual network. Just let me go back quickly. Now it creates a managed private endpoints for the primary storage account. So this is like a by default, right? When you create Azure Synapse Workspace, you get a by default built-in serverless pool, and then you create your Apache Spark or dedicated based on your requirement. And when you would do that, then an endpoint is a point of incoming connection to access a service, right? That's like an endpoint. What does that mean? Now, each Synapse Workspace, they have their own 3 distinct endpoints: dedicated SQL endpoint, serverless SQL endpoint, and the development endpoint. And these endpoints are automatically created when a Synapse workspace is created. How can we use that? Like this is just a picture from the use perspective, just to complete that entire managed VNet and endpoint picture. So you are into your managed VNet. You have some Apache Spark pool, data pipeline is set, data is moving around, but obviously you want to access some Azure storage to get some data or some other information, or you extract some file. Then you would have a managed private endpoint, and that is a dedicated endpoint for the Apache Spark pool in this case. So this is the story around managed private endpoint. Now, the second thing in the network side is private endpoints. Private endpoints, like as this, let's just start going through from that, this slab, like you see, right? This is 1, 2, 3. So this is like the entire workflow of this picture. Now, this material, especially this one, is Microsoft released a white paper on Azure Synapse Security. And in Microsoft Learn, that white paper is there in Microsoft Learn, and I have all the links given. Like if you see that, further down in this slide, and this link is provided right here. So when you want to know more detail, you can definitely go to this link and get more information. So now from the point 1, this is a workstation. From within the customer VNet, access the Azure Synapse private endpoint. So here this is the customer VNet, right? And this is the point 1, which is trying to access this private VNet point. And then this particular thing is paired between the customer VNet and another VNet from like, okay. So I'm just putting this scenario in a real quick fashion just to make you understand that when you have basically dedicated SQL endpoint, serverless SQL endpoint, and development endpoint from various other VNets, because we cannot create VNet internally within our Synapse Analytics, but there are customer VNets, right? And you can connect their endpoint to our endpoint. And you can create private endpoint in the customer VNet side. And then from the customer VNet, their end clients can create another VNet or the endpoint, right? So this can be so we are not going into detail, but this is something just give you the glimpse or the idea that if you are having a private endpoint and a customer VNet, and then various scenarios, right? Maybe we have some database, some host and on-prem, and you have to run the hybrid workload. Then how would you connect? You have a client outside of your VNet, but you don't want that outside of VNet client to connect directly to Synapse. You want to go through that certain private endpoint. So these are the private endpoint. Typically, the big message is for coming from this slide. The most secured way of connecting to your dedicated SQL pool, serverless SQL pool, or Apache Spark is the private endpoint. There are firewalls, other different public networks and all. Okay, there are options, but this is the most secured way. Okay, moving to the last item in the network security, public network access and firewall rule. To protect any sensitive data, it is recommended to disable public access to the workspace endpoint entirely. By doing so, it ensures that all the workspace endpoints can only be accessed via private endpoints, right? We are just coming from that private endpoint story. So in this slide, in my workspace, I have this public network access enabled because this was the default setting. And in general, typically when I work into that thing in my production or even in my secured environment, I keep that disabled. Now, there are times you have like a development environment. You do not have huge private endpoint or huge thing going on. You can whitelist then, and you have a jump host, something, or some other way of connect. You are looking for something, other ways to connect. Then you can just allow that particular IP address, whitelisted IP address at the firewall level, and make that connection. So this is the quick glimpse of how this the best practice is keep the public network access disabled. When we say that it is recommended, because that's where, right, you have to check your own requirement to access control. Access control, just a second, let me just grab a glass of water. Access control to determine a user's right to interact with data. So before access, there is actually one more concept, authorization and authentication. Authorization means, are you an authorized user to be here on this data? If you're not authorized, back off. Like you're not entering into the system by any means. So when you think about that, right? Fundamental concept is least privileges, which is when it comes to authentication. But for authorization, answer is in yes or no. If you are authorized to enter, you're not. If you're not, obviously no connectivity, no private endpoint, or no object level or next level of access, shoo away, you cannot enter here. If you are authorized, then we talk about authentication. Within authentication, there are various types of access. So the access control to determine users' right to interact with the data. It's again a shared responsibility. It's a very important shared responsibility. and it depends on your compliance, access policies, etc. Now, the first one, object level security. Every object in a dedicated SQL pool has an associated permission that can be granted to a principal. Excuse me. In the context of users and service account, right? That's how like these individual table, like object means was table, view, store procedure, function, blah, blah, blah. So now like select can be granted to the user account, SQL login, Azure Active Directory users, database role. So this is like if you're into SQL Server world, it is like a similar to SQL Server world when you are, you have a certain commands and you can grant to the object level permission. And object level permissions, they always work in hierarchy. So you would have a permission, like, the outer layer, the inner layer would inherit the permission from the outer layer. So if you have a group, AD group, and you have a permission at the database level, then it will be the permission from the individual object level, and then schema level. The last unit would be object level. So in this inheritance, it provides the flexibility for database administrators. And it is a similar kind of concept how the SQL Server has. Further, permissions granted on tables and views can be combined with other access control mechanisms, such as column level security, row level security, and dynamic data masking. I'll come to these concepts towards the end again if we get some time. Now, one thing, right? Because the row level security and column level security, they both are supported in Azure Synapse Analytics for dedicated SQL pool, which is formerly used to call it SQL data warehousing. But it is not supported for Apache Spark Pool and serverless SQL. Okay. So now in that case, you would think about that, what do we do there, right? Yeah, we have some other options. We'll understand those. So the object level security we went through, and then row and column level. Just understand one more concept before we move to this. What is the what are the roles and other things in Azure Spark Pool, Apache Spark Pool. So this is also like, remember we discussed about when the network, when you have to open managed VNet, set this to yes during that initial configuration. You cannot do that later on. You have to make few other decisions too during the initial configuration. These decisions you can change, you can make changes into those decisions later on. So one of the another important decision is, so when you are creating your Azure Synapse workspace, right? Additional configuration, you have to assign other users, right? Who should be contributor role on workspace. People who are also authorized and can be there, you have to assign the contributor role on workspace. And you have to that storage, because obviously the storage block account is very critical to have correct access in place. It's very later on, like it becomes like it's a night. It's very time consuming when people have like not correct access. So you make sure that you have other users storage block data contributor role on the storage account. Okay, and also assign them to the workspace storage block data contributor role also on the storage account. So these two roles from the storage account perspective are also very important that you assign to those folks. Now, coming to Synapse, so we saw that, okay, the row level and column level encryption is not supported for Apache Spark Pool and serverless. Now some object level permission is there, but how do we control Apache Spark Pool security? The best method is there are roles. Okay, and you go to that your Apache Spark Pool and go to the access control. And when you have all the administrator and other users, right? You want to provide certain permission, then you have these all the roles there. Like for example, to run a Spark notebook, right? You need Synapse admin, Synapse contributor, and Synapse compute operator role. So these are the things, obviously, you have to know about that for what task, what kind of roles are required, so you can grant them accordingly. But it's very important when it comes to Apache Spark Pool, you go through around these roles and understand who does what. There is a Microsoft link which talks about, and in that link there is one big table which talks about actually with each role what kind of permissions you would be getting. So that is about the Apache Spark role. Moving along. Okay, so we have so far what we have done, just a quick recap. We went through the network layers and the sub layers. We went through the we went through the access layers. I have some scripts for the row level and column level encryption, which I would be also uploading along with this presentation slide. And then we understood that object level permission, and we have Apache Spark. When it comes to, there are certain server roles. Moving along the next layer, which is extremely important, data protection layer. Discovering, classifying, and labeling columns that contain sensitive data in your database. It's extremely important. Now, this is like, it's more like shared responsibility side of thing. And now you so automatically you would see that, mhm. Go ahead, Justin, you're saying something?
No, I think it was someone who joined, so you're okay to carry on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So from the so data discovery and classification. Data discovery and classification is more, applicable for the dedicated server pool. And when it comes to, you have, like, for example, you have a employee data and there is a column for salaries. You don't want everybody to be able to see that. What you can do, you can classify that particular column as high risk. When we'll come to auditing, and we'll see that. So when you have classified that column as high risk, then and enable the auditing, then any point in time somebody would go and query select salary from employee table, then it would be picked via auditing table because you have classified that data as high risk. So what you have done, basically, you have labeled that data, right? That the main classification attribute that is used to define the sensitivity. So label like high risk. And what is the information type is salary. That is what is your column. So once you pick that, then automatically you would see that from the auditing side, and then you can set up the monitoring and alerting. I know Ginger Grant, she has a data security monitoring session after a couple of hours in the data toboggan only. So we will see that, how you can set even monitoring around that. Then comes these data encryption layers. So data encryption, there are various layers, right? Data at rest by default. So let's start with the data encryption. Like, let's just ignore this slide for now. Let's start with the storage layer underneath, right? By default, Azure storage is automatic. It automatically encrypts all the data, because sometimes, right, there are few things which are configured by default. Now, we as naive, or we might not be paying that much attention to data security side, might be just, building our Spark pool, serverless pool, and then consuming the data with some tool. And then, but good thing is, at least somewhere by default, Azure storage automatically encrypts all the data. So the first layer within the data at rest security is already encrypted, which is a really, really great thing. And but then comes the just little bit of, fine lines, right? Every free thing comes with its own some fine print, right? So the fine print here is, it is advanced encryption standard AES 256. And that is one of the strongest block cipher available. It is like a FIPS level 2 federated government standard 140.2 compliant. Ignore the number, but the key takeaway from this is, let's say your company actually is even higher than this encryption. And you are always thinking by default, I'm encrypted, I'm happy, I'm good, but maybe you are still having that violation from your own policy. So just understand your own policy. Long story short. Now, so this is Azure Storage automatically encrypts. So this is one of the strong, the platform, right, manages the encryption keys. And it forms the first layer of data encryption because the storage itself is encrypted, so which is great thing. And this encryption applies to both user, system database, master database, everywhere. Moving to the next layer, TDE. So now here I am on this screen with my dedicated server pool, SQL pool. And as you can see, right, that within each pool, there is you would find a one-stop shop for the security. So in dedicated SQL pool, you see auditing, data discovery classification, dynamic data masking, Microsoft Defender for cloud, and the TDE, transparent data encryption. Transparent data encryption by default is off here because during initial configuration also it asks, do you want to keep it enabled? So, and I had kept that disabled. That is why my data encryption was earlier, like when I was configuring, it was off, and I went ahead and purposefully switched it on. During configuration, I somehow missed that screen snapshot, but during configuration, it asks you one more really important question. Do you want to use your own key? BYOK, bring your own key. In the case, if you have to use your own key, BYOK or customer managed key, then you would be using, like Azure Key Vault, because that is the service where you can store your asymmetric keys, and then it would generate another key, and using those keys, you would be encrypting the database, encrypting your dedicated server SQL pool. At the same time, then if you do that, right, then you might have some key rotation policy and all those things you'll have to enable a lot more in that case. So the TDE can add a second layer of data encryption for dedicated SQL pool. This performs real IO encryption, right? So this is data at rest security. That means IO encryption and decryption of database file, transaction log file, backup at rest, whatever, every single thing would be encrypted. Azure Synapse Server Plus Pool and Apache Spark Pool are analytic engine that work directly with this data lake and Azure Blob Storage. These analytic runtimes don't have any permanent storage and rely on Azure storage encryption technology for data protection. So means your dedicated SQL pool can have more layers when it comes to data at rest. However, your serverless pool and Apache Spark pool is completely relying on that storage layer encryption. That is why, like, see, somewhere Microsoft has partnered really well with when it comes to data security, because I do end up like working on some other side of clouds and many other things, and like a huge proponent of from when it comes to data security, I really like all the features what we have here in Microsoft Azure. It's very difficult to find such things in other services. So we did data at rest in detail. Then comes the data in transit. So this is something like over the wire, right? So this one is by default, so you don't have to do anything. Over the wire data is always encrypted with the TLS 1.2 or whatever the latest TLS version is. So that is the another layer, which is automatically encrypted. There is one concept, this is more, I'm introducing the concept. Like, what if you would have got your BYOK? And in that case, you have your Azure Key Vault, and your keys are stored in your Azure Key Vault. And your company has a policy that security administrator for Azure Key Vault should be different versus the DBA, because they want to give less to DBA, right? DBA just are getting too much power. So in that case, separation of duties, Azure Key Vault administrator would take care of Azure Key Vault operation and all the event logging from the Key Vault and the key rotation, etc. from the Key Vault side, and the DBA would manage the data level of encryption or just configuring the custom BYOK, bring your own keys, level of data at rest security encryption. So this is like just a high level picture to introduce the concept, because if you are doing that right, sometimes we forget to ask right questions during the initial configuration, but later on it becomes a nightmare or too much extra effort. So it's good to ask all those questions so that when you're planning your adding data security layers, you have all you are equipped with all the right questions, and then accordingly you can configure. Threat prevention and detection. This is like, to be honest, right? This is, well, let me just get everything. Yeah, this is one of my favorite part. Why? Microsoft has done awesome job with all the these giving us these features, which Azure Defender for SQL vulnerability. It's like your resident in-house security expert. Azure Defender for SQL threat protection. It's like your 24/7 watchdog, monitoring your traffic coming in and out of database and alert on any suspicious activity, which can be SQL injection or many other things. We'll discuss that. So, and then Azure Security Integration. So all these alerts can be, generated from a centralized place, and one-stop dashboard for your security posture also you can see. Other than that, in your dedicated pool, right, like when it comes to, as I mentioned earlier, right, one-stop shop security for each pool. So in that auditing, by default, your workspace level auditing is disabled. So make sure you enable that, because when you are doing the data discovery and classification and you want to get the data in the auditing, because from the auditing only your security center would pick that, and you can configure your all the alerts, then you have to make sure that you are configuring this auditing, because auditing tracks the database events and writes them to an audit log in your Azure storage account, log analytics workspace or event hub or whatnot. So we have to make sure that you have all those things configured beforehand, typically log analytics workspace. And you have to enable this auditing, enable Azure SQL auditing, right? So this is for more for the Azure SQL, and this is the workspace level, which also you have to enable. And by doing this, automatically your Azure's dedicated SQL pool, Synapse pool, would also start logging into the data into the audit file. As I said that we must enable Azure Defender. Azure Defender works from the subscription level. So from the subscription level, when your Azure Defender is enabled, all you need to do is from the Synapse level also you have to enable. Azure Defender for SQL is a unified package for advanced security capabilities. And once you enable it, it will be like, all that features would be added, and it can send you email alert also. It helps us from potential SQL injection attack, anomalous database access inquiries, suspicious database activities, all in all those things. Okay.
Surbhi, sorry, you asked for a time check with 10 minutes ago, but I've missed that. There's about 6 minutes left.
Okay, no worries, Justin. Thank you. Yeah. Now, in our layers, right, the last layer is Azure Purview integration. This is a game changer when it comes to data governance. During past summit, when SQL 2022 got released, right, Microsoft there was some, I was there in that time. So data management layer, data analytics layer, and data governance layer. These are the three layers that is building our intelligent data platform. And when it comes to data governance, this Azure Purview integration is one of the extremely important tool we got. It's like a unified data governance solution that helps you to manage and govern your on-prem, multi-cloud, software as a service data, easily create a holistic, up-to-date map for your data landscape. In near future, I would be presenting on this tool, because as I said, right, within 45 minutes, it was very difficult to cover all of these aspects, but it was very important to bring all these layers in front of you guys. So when we see that, right, so when we come back and think about these layers, right, back to this ever-evolving data security, we went through each layer, we understood the concept, we got a couple of screen snapshots, but when I upload this presentation, some of the scripts around row level and column level security also I would be uploading. And with that, thank you. And I'll open up for questions. So we have like now full 5 minutes for questions.